Do you know what season we're in? Lent. Very good. Thank you, Jan. Lent. And Lent is how long, Jan?
40 days.
40 days. Thank you very much. But we don't count what?
Sundays.
Sundays. So you get a little break. Every 6 days you get a break. You get a break. Now, why do we have Lent? What's it a time for? It's for Easter, but to get ready, to prepare, to get ready for Easter. Why do we need to get ready for Easter? What happens at Easter? Christ is killed. He's crucified. What happens when he's crucified? He dies. And then the most important thing to our faith happens. What happens? He rises. He's resurrected, right? His crucifixion, death, and resurrection is the most pivotal point to our entire faith journey. And so we need time to prepare ourselves. We need time to get ready for this monumental event, this linchpin event to our faith journey. We need to get ready and we need to prepare. And so in doing, we're looking at a couple different aspects of our lives that Jesus has called us to pay attention to. Do you remember what we talked about last week? What were we talking about last week? Anybody remember the hokey pokey? One foot in, one foot out. Where do we need to be?
All in.
All in. Thank you, Jan. I think last week it was just Jan and I. Where were you guys? We were all in. We said you had to be all in. We said there was ways to do that, and there was 2 ways in specifically that Jesus taught us to be all in. There was 2 very specific rules, if you will. How do you live all in? What is one of them? Loving God. Very good. Thank you, Jesus. Yes. Loving God. And what's the second one? Love your neighbor. Jeannie was here too. Yes. We're going to be all in. We're going to be loving God, and we're going to be loving our neighbor. And Jesus says that leads you to living a transformed life, a life different than you led before. It's not a one-time event, amen? It is an event that happens every day of our lives. We live differently because of the way Jesus has called us to live. But we're human, and so each and every day we strive for this goal. Each and every day we put our feet on the ground. We remember who we need to be loving first. And then because he loved us, we then love our neighbors. And this leads to what kind of a life? A miserable life, isn't it? It's so hard to love your neighbor. No, it leads to a happy life, right? Jesus doesn't want us to be miserable. He wants us to be full of joy and to be happy. I mean, who here does not want to be happy? Right? You want to be happy. You want to have a life filled with joy. I mean, every day you get up and you make choices and decisions to make your life happier. You don't get up and say, how can I ruin my life today? You get up and you say, how can I make things happy? What choices can I make today that's going to make my life a little better? Choices like where you're going to live in this world, or how you're going to spend your money, or what you're going to put in your closets that's going to make you happier, right? Our closets are filled with happy stuff. Stuff that makes us happy. We choose who we're going to hang out with, who we're going to text with, who we're going to like on our Facebook page. Because that all makes us happy. We want to be happy. When you get a vacation from work, do you choose the most depressing place in the world to go? No, you choose some place that's going to make you happy. Unless you're Charlie, then you come back to church. Amen. Lesson learned. But some days we get up in the morning and we can't seem to get to the happy part, right? It's difficult for us to get to the happy part. And then our minds start to spin, and then I know all of you have made this statement at some point in your life. You have said, if only I had a little bit more money. If only I had a bigger house or a better house, or if only I could move, or only if I lived across town, or only if people would appreciate me a little bit more, if only I could get through college, if only I could find a spouse, if only I could retire, if only I had this, or if only I had that, then I would be happy. It was Will Rogers who once said that every now and then he really would grow tired of where he was living. He'd get very tired of his surroundings, and he would think, oh, life is always better somewhere else. And so he would pick a brand new city to go live in. But he did this one thing first. See, he would subscribe to the local newspaper. And he would read that newspaper where he was going to be moving to. He'd read it for 30 straight days every day. And you know what? At the end of every 30 days, he came to the same conclusion. I'm not moving. They have the same problems there that we have here. Happiness really can't be found just simply by moving. But it truly is amazing how many of us go through life looking for happiness. This week, we lost a man who inspired many, many people. A man who tried very hard and strived to walk in the shadow of Jesus. Billy Graham. In his book, The Secret of Happiness, he said this: happiness is what we all long for, what all human beings seek in our jobs, our relationships, our activities. We try so hard to be happy. And all too often we end up empty and unsatisfied. Why? Because we go through life looking for happiness in all the wrong places. Will Rogers and Reverend Graham, they were right. Happiness, it doesn't come from simply changing the location where we live. It doesn't come from changing our companions and our friends. It doesn't come from changing the situations of any kind. Think about this woman at the well that we've talked about. She was what you might call today a scarlet woman. 5 times she had walked down the aisle to be married. And now she was living with a man and having relations with someone that she wasn't receiving any benefit of marriage. You have to wonder, is that the kind of life she chose for herself? I doubt it's the kind of life she chose. Instead, I tend to think that she's clearly searching for something and has been lost her whole life. Searching for acceptance, security, happiness. But she was searching in all of the wrong places. People do that, don't they? So the story that we find in John's Gospel, it takes in a place, in a region that's called Samaria. And this region still exists, obviously. It's now known today as the West Bank. And if you go there today, you can still walk through the town, which was formerly known as Sychar, and it really doesn't look much different than it did when Jesus walked there. There's not that many more people there. There's only about 790 citizens of the area, and they still call themselves today Samaritans. Now, in this town, there's an Eastern Orthodox monastery that has been built, and in the basement or the cellar of that monastery, there is a well. And archaeologists have dated this well back to just about 4,000 years old. For centuries and centuries, stories have been told about travelers who have come along the trail and have stopped by this particular well to quench their thirst. The stories date all the way back to Jacob in Genesis and beyond. There's something else that's very fascinating about this particular well, this place where the Samaritan woman has a noonday encounter with the Christ. This well has been historically validated. Somehow over the time we forget that when we talk about Bible stories and we go through Bible lessons that many of these have been authenticated by historical documents. This particular well is known in the Samaritan history It's known in the Muslim history, it's known in the Jewish history, and it's known in the Christian history. This brief noonday encounter between Jesus and a Samaritan woman, it's completely out of character and context. And so it's told for us. Because you see, first of all, men didn't speak to women publicly. So that's a little wrong. And two, if you know your story at all, you know that the woman was a Samaritan, and therefore Jesus, who was a Jew, had absolutely no reason to be speaking to her. So the woman of the village, she comes walking up to this well, and Jesus addresses her very curtly, I might add, and he says, "Woman, give me a drink." Now, I think on some level this must have blown her away. This is not supposed to be happening in my world. This is completely out of context. And so she speaks back to him, and that should not have happened either, but she says, "How is it that you, a Jew, ask a drink of water from me, a woman of Samaria?" She's a little in his face, isn't she? Telling him what he's doing wrong. But Jesus ignores that. He slides all that away. He says, "I don't care that we're a man and a woman. I don't care that we're racially different. I don't care what people around us or what the culture has said." He speaks right back to her. He says, "If you had known who you were asking." You see this like tit-for-tat conversation they're having here? It's not all warm and friendly to start. He says, if you had known who you were asking for water, you would have asked him and he would have given you living water. Now, of course, Jesus, he's gone deep right off the very first end. He's gone deep and theological, and he's getting really, really, really into it. And she's thinking, this guy's nuts. She's still on the surface level, and she says, go on. She's like, look at you. This well is really deep. The well is 135 feet deep. And she's like, look at you. You didn't even bring a bucket or a cup or even a glass to drink with. You have nothing to draw water out of this well. At first, she misses the point, doesn't she? The woman came seeking water in the middle of the day. She was hiding from all those people around her who were talking about her behind her back. And she gets to this well and she finds it's not the water in the well that she really needs. It's something else. What kind of well do you go to in your life? Where do you go to find refreshment? Where do you go to find happiness? Is that the kind of well that she came to? At Jacob's well, some 2,000 years ago, we're taught that there is one true source of living water. One true source of happiness, if you will, in our lives. One true source of living water that will quench any dryness that we have in our souls. And that's to center our lives on God. Did you know that the only life-sustaining substance that we need more than water is air? Air and water can keep us alive. Water is essential to all kinds of life. Water is life. Camels of the desert eventually need water. There isn't anything living on this earth that does not need water to stay alive. It's no wonder that Jesus turned water and thirst into the ways that he taught about spiritual teachings. And so here he is sitting on the side of Jacob's well, and he uses this as the moment to speak to someone, the moment to quench the thirst that they didn't even know that they had. Because Jesus knows that the thirst of our bodies can lead to death, but the thirst of our souls can lead to spiritual despair. That's the kind of world that Jesus came to. He came to save a world dying from spiritual thirst. So often you might see in the movies, maybe if you've watched an old Western where it gets to the very end and the cowboy is struggling and he's out in the desert and he's crawling on his hands and his feet and he's looking for water. And he's about that far away from the oasis. Right? That's the climactic part of the movie. Is it real? Is it not real? Will he get there? Won't he get there? Does he see it? The same thing happens to you and I. But Jesus, he has a way of getting right to the point of where we are absolutely parched in our lives. Because did you ever notice, Jesus really isn't a chit-chat or small talk. Did you ever notice that? Like the woman walks up to the well and says, "Hey, how's it going? I like your dress. That's a cute jar you have there. What are you doing out at the noonday sun?" None of that. He gets right to the point. He says, "Give me some water." And she says, "Are you crazy?" And he says, "Well, if you knew who you were asking." And he jumps right into it. He attacks her right where she is the most dry in her life. Jesus knew what she needed. But she didn't at the beginning of the conversation. And so Jesus jumps right in there. Do you remember the story we talked about last week about the rich young ruler? He came with all sorts of grandiose ideas, didn't he? He thought he was good. He beat all of you in being at church every Sunday. He gave more than all of you give at church every Sunday. He said prayers out loud. He led Bible studies in small groups. He served. He went on missions trips. He did everything he needed to do. So he came to Jesus and said, "So, what else can I do?" As if to think, oh, he's going to tell me I'm perfect. And Jesus said, "What? Go and sell your stuff." He was one of these people. And Jesus said, "No, you need to be all in." And he couldn't do it. There was a dry spot in his life, his dependence upon his wealth. And Jesus went right after it. The very first step to you and I coming to the right well and finding that living water is us making our own honest confession about where our dry spots are. What's holding us back from being able to see the well we need to be at? What is that thing that we're holding on to? What is the greed? What is the pride? What is the one thing or the two things that is holding us back from seeing Jesus? Jesus says to her, "Well, go and get your husband." Yeah, right. Yeah, no, can you hear him? He's like, "Go get your husband." She makes an honest confession. She says, "I don't have a husband." Can you imagine how hard that was for her? Realizing the kind of life that she's leading and the way she's been treated back in town by the other woman. I mean, that's why she's there in the noonday sun. And she says to him, "I don't have a husband." That short statement is weighted with confession and humility upon her part. And right there she realizes this man knows all about me. She could have lied. She could have avoided it. But she confessed to who she was. And then Jesus, he gives her great accolades. He says, "You're right, and that's great that you admitted that. I knew that already. But now you and I know that together." we need to confess some things in our lives so that we can get past them. Jesus already knows them. And all he says to us, let's move them out of the way. Let's put that aside, he says to her. Because the time is now coming. He says this twice to her. The time is coming and now is here. And he looks at her and he addresses her as an everyday, common, sinful woman that's there at the well. And he says to her, I have what you need. And it's not the water at the bottom of the well. It's the water that comes from me. Living water. She stood face to face with the man who could give her life. This is the well we all need to be at. This is the well that pours into our lives. I mean, think about it. This woman is not a leper. She's not blind. She's not deaf. She's not lame. She's not like any of the others that Jesus has come to. But she certainly is crippled, isn't she? She certainly is disabled in her life. She certainly is hiding behind something in her life. It has given her a tremendous inability to be part of anything that she's part of. She can't find love. She can't find happiness. She can't find comfort. And she's been going to the wrong well. Time after time after time after time after time and time again. So finally she comes to this well. And she's told the time is now. So he gives her a drink. He says, I, the one that you're speaking to, am he. That must have blown her away. All I've been hearing about, and all I've been wondering, and all I've been thinking about, and all this division between the Samaritans and the Jews, and you have your place to worship, and we have our place to worship. But no, I mean, seriously? You're he, and you're speaking to little old me. I am the living water, he said. You know, the Apostle Paul, he writes about this same joy that I can just imagine is leaping inside of this woman's heart. Paul wrote, all the things I once thought were so important are gone from my life, compared to the high privilege of knowing Christ Jesus as my master. First-hand, everything I once thought I had going for me is now insignificant. I've dumped it all in the trash so that I could embrace Christ. And so what does this woman do? She drops her water bucket. She drops her clay jar and she runs back to town. Can you imagine what that must have looked like? Here's a lady that none of you would ever speak to, but you all talked about. You would never invite her over for tea. You would never have her over to your house. You wouldn't wave to her as you went by, but you would all talk about her because you all knew about her life. And here she comes running back into church, big smile on her face, and she's exclaiming, you've got to meet this man who knows everything there is to know about me. You've got to come meet him. Now you know, in some people's mind, they're thinking, hey, there's a guy out there who knows all and tells all. Let's go out and see what he has to say about her. You know, it's like that Housewives show that you all watch. This is Housewives of Sychar, you know, and she's the first one. But not only did she come running back telling about her experience on that noon day out at the well, she talked about what she knew and what she felt and what that meant to her. And then she went around and she asked the most important question any one of us could be asked. Do you think this is Christ? Do you think this is the Messiah active in the world? Do you think this is the Messiah active in me? Do you think Christ could do this for me? Do you think he could do it for you? She changed the conversation very quickly, doesn't she? We call this today evangelism. Church leaders hate to talk about evangelism because we know you're all deathly afraid of it. Who wants to go out and talk about Jesus? I don't know enough about Jesus to talk about Jesus. I have not read, studied, and memorized the Bible, therefore I can't lead a Bible study. I can't have people come to my house in a small group and talk about Jesus. Why not? You can't talk about your experiences. You can't talk about how something that turned in your life made you feel. You can't talk about how you saw a miracle happen in someone else's life. You can't talk about the happiness that you now feel knowing Jesus Christ is in your life. That's all she did. That's the way she did it. And then she asked the question, what do you think? She had the best small group going ever. I want to tell you, if you think you can't lead a Bible study, you can't have a small group, I'm going to tell you right here and now, that's nothing more than Satan working in your life. That's all that is. Because he knows you have a great story to tell about Jesus, and he doesn't want you to. He doesn't want you telling about your experience. So he makes you feel like you can't. Think about this woman. She has confessed. She is accepted, she has run back to town, and she has lost all the shame that she was carrying. If that doesn't give you motivation, she came to that well on the noonday sun completely alone. Completely alone in her life. And when she left, she was part of some brand new community. She came in that noonday sun with her head hanging down, filled with disgrace about her 6 experiences. And yet when she left that well, she was filled with grace. What well have you been visiting to fill your soul? This woman of Sychar, she had been living in a desert in her life. And a lot of people are. It may not be a companionship desert. It may not be an addiction desert. It may not be a selfishness or a pride or a greed desert. It may be filled with hatred or anger. It may be some unforgiving spirit that's holding on to you. But a lot of us have one foot in. And we sense that we're not being filled. We're not being refreshed. Our souls are not being quenched because the world tells us we're not happy. And so we fill our lives with things to do and activities to be at and closets that are overflowing, and yet we are still dying of thirst. And then along comes Jesus and he says, you don't want what's in the well, you want what's in me. Living water. Listen to the promise that Jesus has made to us. If anyone thirsts, let him come to me and drink. He who believes in me, as the scripture has said, out of his heart shall flow rivers. Rivers of living water. That means when you come to Jesus, he doesn't give you a little bit. He doesn't give you a taste of living water. He doesn't even give you a full cup of water. He gives you a cup that never stops flowing of living water. Fill my cup, Lord. I lift it up, Lord. Come and quench this thirsting of my soul. Bread of heaven, Feed me till I want no more. Fill my cup. Fill it up. And make me whole. Amen. As our worship